Hey everybody, welcome to an exciting edition of Reimagining Main Street. I'm Laura Richards and I'm here today with Patrick Lee, CEO of the Spark Business Institute. Hey Patrick.
Hello, Laura.
You're subdued today.
I'm subdued because I know that my face is going to freeze multiple times during this, but hopefully you will hear my audio the entire time.
Excellent. So Patrick, we constantly talk about how spending in local sustainable economies is the way to promote better wages and how to impact our communities in a profound way. Why is that?
So yeah, it's interesting that we talk about this a lot, but the mechanics behind it, how it actually works and why it's that way, I think we need to spend a little bit of time explaining to folks. So understanding the following thing, it's called the local multiplier effect, is the heart of understanding why buying local and small business Main Street economies are the best model. Okay, so let's look at what that local multiplier effect is. So a study by Civic Economics focused on a chain bookstore in Austin, Texas versus two locally owned bookstores. Researchers found that $100 spent in the chain store would recirculate $13 in the Austin community, while the same amount spent at the local stores would recirculate $45 in the Austin economy. Okay, this is that local multiplier effect, and that shows you why communities that attract those large box stores as their economic development model never seem to see full prosperity, right? While those that support the local Main Street businesses tend to do much better. So think about this. You've seen this a lot where sort of a little down and out community is all gung-ho about getting the Walmart in town, right? Because it's going to create jobs and all this. The Walmart shows up, but the net gain doesn't seem to be very high because, small businesses start closing down right and left, right? This is an important piece to this. The money spent to attract that Walmart, if it was used to revitalize Main Street, would likely have a much higher impact on raising that little town's economic prosperity.
Right. So a new job in the community is not simply a new job in the community, regardless of where it comes from, right?
It will be no surprise to our listeners that the answer is a resounding no. A study performed by Iowa State University found that if you built an ethanol plant, yes, they picked ethanol plant, but if you built an ethanol plant with no local ownership whatsoever, 140 jobs would be created. By increasing the local ownership over 70%, the multiplier effect more than doubles the jobs created to 300. Okay, so why is this? Well, first, many of the support services for the plant will be done out of the region if it is a corporate plant, right? The corporation will use attorneys, CPAs, and other professional help associated with the national corporate headquarters. Local ownership uses locally sourced professional help. So let's talk about infrastructure maintenance. Okay, that's frequently done offsite in the same manner, right? Think about fleet maintenance. So fleet maintenance is done at large corporate fleet maintenance facilities, right? Local ownership tends to use outsourced local mechanics or hires local mechanic talent, right? In addition, many of the big corporate facilities are drawn to areas based upon tax abatements, okay? So they're coming there to get that discount, let's say. Okay, the local businesses don't get that. They're not giving tax abatements to be in business, right? We're going to attract the big one by doing this. Well, if you think about how this works, not only do you have that local multiplier, you're also giving a discount for that large business to be there. Think about if you reallocated some of that towards, your small business local economy.
So I'm going to back that up with an example. There was an investigation done by the Register Guard newspaper in Eugene, Oregon, and they looked at the impact in one county in Oregon of 5 years of giving away $6 million in tax abatements. So 95% of the money went to 6 large non-local businesses. 3 of them came, they took the money, in a year or two they shut down and they moved those locations to Asia. So that money all just left. 2 came and took the money and they stayed, but they underdelivered on how many jobs they said they were going to create. And 1 of the businesses took the money, stayed, and was on target. So only 5% of that money went to about 100 small local businesses. They made modest job promises, but they delivered. So in aggregate, they were the winner. They were the one you should have put your money on if you were betting. And so, and the bottom line on that was crazy. In tax abatement terms, a new local job cost only about $2,100 of business tax forgiveness for the local 100 businesses they put their money on. But the cost of getting a new job from one of the outside businesses in net job terms was $67,200. So if that doesn't convince you.
That's crazy. Okay. That is totally crazy. And let's couple that with what you talked about. A few of those businesses moved to Asia, right? Okay. Well, local businesses tend to be immobile. The option of simply leaving the area for cheaper environs or outside tax abatement solicitations is dramatically reduced. Without the departure option always in the number 1 slot when negotiating, right? These local businesses are much more likely to embrace reasonable public efforts to raise labor and environmental standards and do other things that are looked at as a cost or a nuisance to corporate America. In the local community, they're more willing to accept it, and it ends up raising the standards in that local community because of it, right? So the fact that they're somewhat immobile and not likely to jump ship is another huge benefit of investing in those type of companies.
100%. And the fact that local businesses tend to be small, these businesses are the ones that anchor walkable, smart growth communities. And we've talked about that a lot on the podcast as well. And actually, Cornell University did a study that looked at 226 manufacturing-dependent counties in the U.S., and they concluded that communities dependent on outside companies are subject to greater inequality, lower levels of well-being, and higher rates of social disruption. And if you think back to that podcast that we did where we were talking about urban gardens, it kind of reminds me of that. When you have smaller communities, community involvement, gardening, all of that raises all of the things about well-being and everything like that. And if you think about those big box stores coming in, you can see how that would almost be the opposite of that. It's kind of interesting. So anyway, we've thrown a bunch of examples out there, Patrick, but now we need to tell people, how do we take a proactive stance to promote local sustainable communities?
So I think one of the things before we jump into some details here, I do think one of the things that we should mention here is these kind of conversations. It felt like we just gave a lot of data, right? And we like to back our stuff up with some data, but we also like to sort of wax philosophically. And I think what we've seen here with this is, I bet those numbers shock people. I bet people who are listening to this, they're listening to those numbers and they're like, seriously, it was $67,500 to create a single job from those 6 big companies versus $2,100 to create a job in the local thing. Why are we spending our money that way? Well, let's be real specific about this. We're spending our money that way because we don't have a voice, right? We can side with our corporate America folks, all the folks who are backing economic development as it's set up now, which benefits corporate America, or we can side with the folks who are all about boosting labor and creating safety nets and making making, I don't want to say handouts because I hate the political terms of that, but that there's a lot of giveaway or there's a lot of corporate, and small business tends to have to choose between two sort of political realities that don't benefit them in any way. So we need to have these discussions. We need to be talking about how this stuff needs to be understood so people can know what they're voting for or what a particular initiative promoted by government is actually going to do to their communities and their businesses. And I feel like most folks are running blind. All right. So let's kind of circle back around on this a little bit. Michael Schumann, economist from an organization called Bally, I hope that's pronounced right, says that there are 6 kinds of activities that are essential to promoting local sustainable communities. Number 1 is local planning. Number 2 is local entrepreneurship. Number 3 is local business alliances that move beyond traditional chambers and Rotary. Number 4 is local purchasing. Number 5 is local public policy. And the final one is local finance, which is something that we're going to discuss on an upcoming podcast. But let's kind of go through each of those and sort of describe what it is that is meant by each of the terms.
All right. So starting off with local planning. You want to get that one, Patrick? You want me to get that one?
I'm happy to jump on that if you want. So let's just say this. Too often the planning approach is centered on how a business community can find its place in the global economy. Okay. So this is about, what 1 or 2 comparative advantages does this community have compared to other communities, right? But that approach is not taking into account anything related to the local truth of that community, right? This is trying to fit into a global economic reality and being looked at and said, well, they have cheaper wages there, they'll fit in this way, right? So instead, how does that community grow local businesses in order to plug the leaks of dollars spent on outside goods and services that could be produced locally? And we hear about this all the time. We hear about, goods being trucked or put on trains across the country from this community to this community. And does that make any sense? What is the environmental impact? What is the job impact? What is the cost impact of not producing, those goods in a local, sustainable fashion?
That's a good one. Secondly, local entrepreneurship. Having a discussion around that and how do we repurpose the misspent economic development money to train, educate, and encourage local entrepreneurship. So, you've seen micro business investment, that approach being used in the third world. What do we do here to do that? If we know that those local small businesses are going to employ people at a lower cost, we should be doing that. We should have lots of initiatives that are working toward that end versus bringing in those big box stores. So having those dialogues is really important.
And then number 3 was, the local business alliances. And very specifically, we talked about this a lot of, the chambers and a lot of the standard groupings tend to exist for basically the promotion of networking, lead trading. It doesn't feel like it's bringing together and uniting businesses with common interest, right? It's providing little areas for folks to come in and compete to get business, but it's not taking this and saying, okay, hey, all these businesses, we're all together in this. We may be competitive in some instances, but we all benefit if the local economy is doing well, and we can advocate, right? We can make connections. We can do a whole lot of community building through these organizations versus what is sort of standardly done. And we've kind of talked about this stuff in previous podcasts quite a bit. So I don't think we need to go into this one that much.
On number 4, we're looking at local purchasing, and this discussion about the purpose of buy local movements. So how do you get the word out? How do you get everybody educated around it? How do you create the joint marketing? How do you identify which communities would benefit the most from it? And we see this a lot in our own backyard in Annapolis on Main Street or Maryland Avenue. Those movements in each of these little enclaves, the arts district, where they're having these discussions and they're doing it very well. And they're united and they work together on education and marketing and within the community. So we see these discussions happening. I think continue to educate the public as well on why they need to support the local economy is really important.
And number 5 was local public policy. And so let's be real blunt, okay? Economic development is led by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and federal commerce initiatives, right? And these emphasize corporations. They emphasize very large, globally focused businesses. And a lot of the initiatives are about attracting outside transient businesses into various communities. Now, that may on some level, though it can be argued it doesn't, but it, on some level that might boost certain things in the aggregate, but they're not helping the local communities. And honestly, there is a lot of discussion that it's not helping anything in the aggregate either, right? We're just driving down wages and driving jobs to cheaper in places overseas, right? So, that whole global competitiveness push, read low wages, low taxes, right? That's what it's all about. It's not about putting people into jobs that are livable wage jobs. It's not about community, community coming together and being sustainable and, all that. So this is demonstrably bad public policy, for us. It's great policy for corporate America and for Wall Street, but it's not good for our communities. These monies line the pockets of Wall Street, and they leave Main Street in a constant state of productivity increases that yield little to no public gain.
And that was really played out in that Oregon example that I gave at the top of the show.
Yeah.
Where you see how expensive, the money's being spent to $67,000 to get a staff versus, $2,000 or roughly. It's pretty incredible.
It is.
Pretty demonstratable. So, and that brings us to our final one, which was local finance. And really, we have so much on local finance that we want to devote an entire 20-minute podcast to that. So on the next edition of Reimagining Main Street, we will be talking all about local finance. So Patrick, is there anything that you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Only that, this information that's out there, it's readily available. So, challenging people on their understanding of how economics play out in the country, in their communities, what constitutes a good job versus a not good job, why things are the way they are. I think there's a lot of stuff that we just accept because we've heard it, the pundits on TV are saying it, people just say something as if it's truth. But if you really dig into this and understand how the money works in the local economies, it becomes pretty clear what would benefit us all. We should be united in this. This should not be dividing us in any way. So because it's out there and it's so easy to find now, go find it. Go have these conversations. Be part of
we got to get
solution.
Educated so we can take action together.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody, for watching and listening to another edition of Reimagining Main Street. And we'll see you again in a week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.